April 15, 1945. British forces liberate Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in northwestern Germany. What they find is beyond comprehension. 60,000 prisoners, most starving, diseased, barely alive. 13,000 unburied corpses scattered across the camp. Typhus, tuberculosis, and dysentery running rampant. The stench is so overwhelming that hardened combat soldiers vomit at the gates. And walking among this hell, perfectly composed, impeccably dressed, is a 21-year-old blonde woman carrying a braided whip and a pistol. Her name is Irma Grese. She is an SS-Aufseherin, a senior supervisor of female prisoners. And over the next 72 hours, as British investigators begin interviewing survivors, the same name appears in testimony after testimony after testimony. Irma Grese, the woman with the whip, the woman with the dogs, the woman who smiled when prisoners died. Within 6 months, she will stand trial for crimes against humanity. Within 7 months, she will be hanged. She will be 22 years old, the youngest woman ever executed under British law. And the evidence against her will be so overwhelming, so specific and so horrifying that even her own defense attorney will barely try to save her. This is not a story about the banality of evil or ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. This is the story of someone who found power in cruelty and wielded it with precision until the world held her accountable. Let me show you exactly what she did and why she could not escape justice. Here's what you need to understand about Irma Grese before we go any further. She was not a Nazi ideologue. She was not a fanatic believer in Hitler's racial theories. She was not driven by political conviction or wartime trauma, or any of the explanations that historians sometimes use to explain SS behavior. According to her own testimony at trial, corroborated by multiple sources, Irma Grese joined the SS camp system in 1942 at age 18 for one reason. The pay was better than dairy farming. She had been working as a farmhand in rural Germany, milking cows for 12 Reichsmarks a week. The SS was offering 30 Reichsmarks a week plus room and board for women willing to serve as concentration camp guards. She applied. She was accepted. She reported to Ravensbrück concentration camp for training in July 1942, and according to training records that survived the war, her supervising officer noted in her file after 2 weeks that Grese showed natural aptitude for discipline enforcement and demonstrated no emotional weakness when required to administer physical correction. Translation: she was good at hurting people, and she did not hesitate. Within 3 months, she was promoted. Within 6 months, she was transferred to Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest extermination camp in the Nazi system. She was 19 years old, and she was about to become one of the most feared individuals in human history. Let me show you what Irma Grese did at Auschwitz, because the evidence is not ambiguous. It is not based on hearsay or post-war exaggeration. It comes from multiple independent sources, sworn testimony from survivors, corroboration from other SS guards, and Grese's own admissions. At Auschwitz, Grese was assigned to the women's camp at Birkenau, where she supervised approximately 30,000 female prisoners at any given time. Her official duties were roll call enforcement, work detail organization, and camp discipline. Here is how she carried out those duties. Every morning at 4:30 a.m., prisoners were required to stand at attention for roll call, often for hours in freezing cold or blazing heat, while SS guards counted and recounted to ensure no one had escaped during the night. Grese walked through these formations carrying a braided leather whip and accompanied by trained dogs, German shepherds that she personally controls. According to testimony from survivor Gisela Perl, a Jewish doctor who was imprisoned at Auschwitz and survived to testify at Grese's trial, Irma Grese would deliberately seek out women who were swaying from exhaustion or illness during roll call and set her dogs on them. Dr. Perl testified, "I watched her unleash her dog on a Hungarian woman who had collapsed from typhus. The woman was too weak to stand. Grese stood 3 feet away, smiling, and watched the dog tear at the woman's legs. When the woman stopped screaming, Grese called the dog off and walked away. The woman died 2 hours later. This was not an isolated incident. It was routine. But here is what made Irma Grese different from other camp guards, and this is critical to understanding why she became specifically infamous. Most S guards at Auschwitz treated cruelty as a job requirement. They did what they were ordered to do. They enforced discipline. They participated in selections. They carried out executions. It was systematic, bureaucratic evil. Grese did more than what was required. She innovated. Survivor Olga Lengyel, author of the book Five Chimneys, The Story of Auschwitz, testified that Grese would conduct what she called beauty inspections of female prisoners. She would walk through the barracks and select women she deemed too attractive or too well kept. According to Lengyel's testimony, Grese would then personally cut the faces of these women with a whip or have her dogs attack them, specifically targeting their faces to, quote, remind them what they really are. Multiple survivors corroborated this. This was not an order from above. This was not policy. This was personal. Grese also developed a reputation for her role in selections, the process by which SS doctors and guards determined which prisoners were fit for labor and which would be sent immediately to the gas chambers. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, selections happened constantly. New transports arrived. Prisoners too weak to work were removed. Grese participated in these selections with what survivors described as visible enthusiasm. Testimony from survivor Hanka Rosenweg states she would stand at the selection ramp when transports arrived from Hungary, from Poland, from anywhere. She would point left, point right. Left meant work, right meant gas chamber. She knew what it meant. We all knew. And the first saw her laughing with another guard while doing it, laughing while sending children to their deaths. Now, here is where we have to be very careful with the historical record. Atrocity testimony can sometimes be exaggerated in the immediate aftermath of liberation, due to trauma and the need to process unimaginable horror. But Irma Grese's case is different. Her crimes were corroborated by multiple independent sources who did not know each other, from different countries, different transports, and different time periods. Polish survivors testified to the same behavior as Hungarian survivors. French resistance members who ended up in Auschwitz gave testimony that matched Greek Jewish survivors. The consistency is damning. And more importantly, other SS guards testified against her. That almost never happened. SS personnel usually protected each other during war crimes trials. But multiple SS women who served alongside Grese at Auschwitz told British investigators that Grese's behavior was extreme, even by camp standards, that she volunteered for duties other guards tried to avoid, and that she seemed to derive personal satisfaction from prisoner suffering. In March 1945, as Soviet forces approached Auschwitz, Grese was transferred to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Germany. Bergen-Belsen was not an extermination camp. It had no gas chambers. It was originally a detention camp for prisoners the Nazis intended to use as hostages or exchange for German prisoners of war. But by early 1945, as the Nazi camp system collapsed, Bergen-Belsen became a dumping ground for prisoners evacuated from camps in the East. The population exploded from 15,000 in December 1944 to over 60,000 by April 1945. There was no food, no sanitation, no medical care. Typhus spread like wildfire. Prisoners died by the thousands. And Irma Grese, now promoted to senior supervisor, was responsible for maintaining order in the women's section. Here is how she did that, according to testimony from Dr. Ada Bimko, a Jewish-Polish dentist who survived Bergen-Belsen and later testified at the Belsen trial. Grese instituted a system where prisoners who were too sick to work were denied all food rations. Dr. Bimko testified that Grese would walk through the barracks in the morning and identify women who could not stand. She would mark them. They received no food. Within days they were dead. This was her policy, not a German policy. Her policy. Survivor Helene Kopper testified that Grese personally beat a 16-year-old girl to death with her whip for stealing a potato from the camp kitchen. Not shot, beat to death, over a potato. Multiple witnesses corroborated this. The girl's name was Rachel Silberman. She was from Krakow. She had been in the camps for 18 months. She died 3 weeks before liberation. And then came April 15, 1945. British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen. The SS guards, including Irma Grese, were immediately detained. And here's where the story takes a turn that reveals everything you need to know about who Irma Grese was. Most SS guards, when captured, either tried to flee, killed themselves, or claimed they were just following orders. Grese did none of those things. When British soldiers arrived, she was found walking through the camp, whip in hand, as if it were a normal day. She offered no resistance. She seemed annoyed at the interruption. According to the officer who arrested her, Lieutenant John Randall, Grese's first words to him were, "I have done nothing wrong. I was following regulations." When Randall pointed to the thousands of corpses and the skeletal prisoners surrounding them, Grese reportedly said, "They were enemies of Germany. What did you expect us to do?" There was no remorse, no recognition, no human response to the suffering around her. Lieutenant Randall later testified that in 15 months of combat across Europe, he had never met anyone as cold as Irma Grese. British military authorities immediately began collecting evidence for war crimes trials. They interviewed hundreds of Bergen-Belsen survivors. The same name kept appearing. Irma Grese, the woman with the whip, the woman with the dogs. Investigators tracked down survivors who had been at Auschwitz. The same name, Irma Grese. By the time the trial began in September 1945, prosecutors had testimony from 47 different witnesses across 6 nationalities, all describing consistent patterns of abuse, murder, and cruelty. The trial was held at Lüneburg, Germany. Irma Grese was charged with crimes against humanity, specifically with murder, torture, and systematic abuse of prisoners at Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. She was 22 years old. She showed no emotion during most of the trial. Survivors testified. They described the whippings, the dogs, the selections, the beatings. Grese sat silently, occasionally taking notes. Her defense attorney, Major Cranfield, had an impossible job. The evidence was overwhelming, so he tried a different approach. He argued that Grese was young, impressionable, and had been conditioned by the Nazi system. He argued that she was following orders in a totalitarian state where disobedience meant death. He argued that the camp system itself was criminal, and Grese was merely a cog in that machine. Here is why that defense failed. The prosecution brought forward testimony from other SS guards who had served in the same camps. They testified that guards were never ordered to personally beat prisoners. They were never ordered to set dogs on sick women. They were never ordered to conduct beauty inspections or disfigure prisoners. Those actions were Grese's personal choices. The prosecution then did something brilliant. They brought in SS training manuals and camp regulations. They showed that even under Nazi rules, guards were not supposed to engage in random violence. Violence was supposed to be systematic, bureaucratic, documented. What Grese did went beyond even SS protocols. She was not following orders, she was exceeding them. And then the most damning evidence. The prosecution presented Grese's own service record. It showed that she had been promoted multiple times, that she had received commendations for discipline enforcement, and that her superiors specifically noted her initiative and dedication. In other words, she was rewarded for going above and beyond. That destroyed any claim that she was a reluctant participant or a victim of the system. She had thrived in it. The prosecution's closing argument was devastating. They did not try to portray Grese as a monster. They portrayed her as exactly what she was, a human being who made choices, who chose cruelty when kindness was possible, who chose violence when restraint was possible, who chose to flourish in a system built on murder. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. They found Irma Grese guilty on all counts. The sentence was death by hanging. Under British military law at the time, there was no appeal for crimes against humanity. The sentence would be carried out within 30 days. Grese showed no reaction when the verdict was read. According to observers, she stared straight ahead, expressionless. Back in her cell, she reportedly told a guard, "I was just doing my job. They are hanging me for doing my job." Even then, no recognition, no understanding, no remorse. On December 13, 1945, at Hameln prison in Germany, Irma Grese was led to the gallows. She was 22 years old. The executioner was Albert Pierrepoint, Britain's chief hangman, who had executed hundreds of condemned criminals. According to Pierrepoint's later memoir, Grese walked to the gallows without assistance, showed no emotion, and said nothing. She was hanged at 9:34 a.m. Death was instantaneous. She was the youngest woman ever executed under British law, and the evidence against her was so overwhelming that in 80 years since, no serious historian has questioned the verdict. So here is what we need to understand about Irma Grese. This is not a story about a fanatic or an ideologue. This is a story about someone who discovered that cruelty gave her power and status, and she chose to embrace it. She was not ordered to become a monster. She volunteered for it. She could have requested a transfer. Other guards did. She could have done the minimum required. Other guards did. She could have shown restraint. Other guards did. She chose not to. And here's the question that historians still debate. Was Irma Grese evil, or was she ordinary? The answer is both. She was ordinary in that nothing in her background predicted what she became. She had no history of violence, no childhood trauma, no radicalization. She was a dairy farmer who took a job for better pay. But she was evil in what she chose to do with that job. Evil is not always extraordinary. Sometimes it is a choice made over and over again, until it becomes routine. Grese chose to hurt people when she did not have to. She chose to enjoy it, and she chose to keep doing it until the day she was stopped. The Holocaust produced many perpetrators. Some were ideologues. Some were sadists. Some were bureaucrats. Irma Grese does not fit neatly into any category. She was something more disturbing. She was someone who discovered that power over life and death felt good, and she pursued it with the same dedication someone else might pursue a career or a hobby. There is a reason she became infamous even among camp guards. It is because her cruelty was personal, visible, and unnecessary. She could have been a guard who looked away. She chose to be a guard who smiled while watching people die. And when the world held her accountable, she genuinely seemed not to understand why. That might be the most chilling part of her story. Not that she did what she did, but that she never understood why it was wrong. So here is my question for you. When you hear the phrase, just following orders, knowing what Irma Grese actually did and the evidence that she went far beyond any orders, do you think individual accountability matters even in a totalitarian system? Or do you think the system itself bears all the responsibility? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story reinforced why we must never forget these crimes or the individuals who chose to commit them, hit that like button and subscribe for more history that documents what happened so we never repeat it. Thanks for watching.